Is Michael Flynn about to flip? The former National Security Advisor's lawyers have reportedly stopped sharing info with President Trump's attorneys. Legal experts say it's a sign Flynn could be cutting a deal with the special counsel in the Russia probe. President Trump, meanwhile, heading to Capitol Hill next week as Senate Republicans try to pass their tax plan. We'll look at its chances with our political panel. And Democratic Senator Al Franken apologizing after 4 women accused him of groping them. But he's apparently not planning to resign. And there's word Uber's new CEO also covered up that hack of more than 50 million people's personal info. That's all ahead this hour. I'm Ed Henry in for Shepard Smith. Lawyers for President Trump's former National Security Advisor, retired General Michael Flynn, might be making a move to cooperate with the feds on the Russia investigation. That's what sources tell Fox News today. They say Flynn's attorneys are no longer sharing info with other legal teams, including President Trump's. The New York Times broke that story. Analysts say it suggests Flynn may be cutting a deal with special counsel Robert Mueller. He's, of course, looking into Russia's meddling in the 2016 campaign and possible collusion with members of the Trump camp. The White House and Russian President Vladimir Putin have repeatedly said there was no collusion. Attorneys for the former National Security Advisor would not comment. But a member of the president's legal team tells Fox Flynn getting a possible plea deal is not unexpected and thus maybe not a big deal. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen live in our D.C. newsroom. James, we knew Flynn was seeking some sort of a deal in exchange for testimony. So is it possible this turns out to be not very much?
Unlikely. And as we have seen, Ed, in past high-profile cases with special prosecutors and potential star witnesses, such as John Dean in Watergate, that quest for immunity took General Flynn to Capitol Hill and the special counsel's office. Sources close to this investigation tell Fox News that General Flynn's attorney, Bob Kellner, did indeed speak with the president's legal team this week to convey formally that the Flynn team can no longer participate in information sharing with other attorneys engaged with the special counsel. But the source emphasized that the call to the president's team was one of several Kellner made.
And under those circumstances, there's 1,000 different reasons why you want to cut off communication, because you don't want some question as to whether or not information that Flynn obtained came from after he started talking with prosecutors.
And one important factor in Flynn's calculations right about now is that his son is also widely believed to be under federal scrutiny, Ed.
James, the big question, obviously, how might this cooperation impact the president?
Ed, the president's lawyers project confidence, at least right now, that any charges Flynn might face would be related to the general's work as a lobbyist for Turkey and not related to Russia. General Flynn's lawyers possibly entering into a potential plea is not unexpected, said Jay Sekulow, a member of the Trump legal team, adding, no one should draw the conclusion that this means anything about General Flynn cooperating against the president. However, some published reports indicate the special counsel's office is looking at certain actions taken by President Trump, such as an alleged conversation with then FBI Director James Comey expressing the hope that the Flynn case could be dropped, and an alleged April 25 phone call to Flynn in which the president reportedly urged him to, quote, stay strong.
He hoped that General Flynn was a good guy and that things would work out for him. Well, that's called human compassion. And the FBI director did not bother if he thought it was such an intimidation.
And analysts say if Flynn does provide testimony, defense counsel will seek to impeach his credibility by claiming he lied on federal forms and elsewhere. Ed.
James Rosen in Washington, thank you. Big story, and we have former federal prosecutor John Laurel here on the news deck. Good to see you, John.
Hello.
What is your sense? You've been saying privately that you think this is the most significant development in this investigation so far. Why?
It is, because it's obvious that he's facing some very serious charges, possibly dealing with his relationships with Turkey. There have been other speculations that he may have been involved in a kidnapping plot. We just don't know. But he's made a decision with his counsel to have some communication with the prosecutor about doing a deal and cooperating. The only way he's going to get a reduced sentence is by cooperating.
Right. But when you lay that out, when General Flynn is in legal jeopardy and potentially his son is in legal jeopardy,
yes,
might someone say almost anything to stay out of jail?
That's true, and that's what happens in the federal system. You don't get any points for exonerating someone. You only get points if you implicate someone and really try to get them prosecuted. So he has an incentive to spill the beans or say things that would implicate somebody else.
So then how will this work so that if in fact he cuts a deal with the special counsel, Robert Mueller, walk us through what happens from a legal standpoint, but then how does Mueller sort out whether or not it's true or bunk?
Well, first of all, what we know now is that none of this has to do with the campaign. That's very important. It has to do with other relationships that the general has had unrelated to the campaign.
His lobbying on Turkey and other matters.
Exactly.
Okay.
But the way it goes is this. The prosecutor comes to you and says, listen, I have the goods on your client. He's going to be prosecuted. You better make a decision. Come and cooperate, flip to our side, or we're going to go after you. We're going to go after relatives. It's going to get very nasty. Clearly, Flynn has made the decision that he...
And that proffer lays out what he might say, and then how do they sort it out?
Well, the prosecutor wants to know that he's going to get some help.
Right.
So if the proffer is, I don't know anything about anything, then you're told, well, have a good day, I'll see you later.
Right.
So he has to give some goods in order to get some
But if he
benefit.
says, I can implicate the president, and I was the national security advisor, and in private, the president told me X, the special counsel has already spent weeks, months looking through emails and other documents. So then you run the traps and figure out, can we verify this?
And that's the critical question, because somebody going in who does a deal and there's no corroboration for what they're saying, they don't have much credibility. So the critical issue here is whether or not his statements can be corroborated by hard facts, because one day he's going to face a criminal defense lawyer in trial, and he better be telling the truth.
So contrast this with Paul Manafort, who's already been indicted. He's insisted he's innocent. But it seems to me a much different situation, because some of the alleged crimes date back to the mid-2000s. So the Trump people have been, and people inside the White House have been able to say, wait, this is a long time ago, number one. And number two, he was fired in the middle of the 2016 campaign, Manafort. In contrast, General Flynn was not just involved in the campaign, he got hired, quickly fired, but he was inside that White House in the early days.
Well, not only that, but he was there during the transition.
Right.
And it looks like Mueller is looking at facts relating to that transition period. So clearly Mueller has determined that he's an important figure. That's why it's significant that he's doing a deal.
But now let's go back to what one of your first points, which is that this is about General Flynn maybe not federally disclosing that he was lobbying on behalf of the government of Turkey, for example. What does that have to do with Russian collusion?
It has nothing to do, but that's why Mueller's investigation is going so far afield. Because what he's doing is picking people that have their own problems, like Manafort and Kelly, and saying, you better cooperate with me on the Russian investigation.
Doesn't that give more fodder to President Trump and his allies, that even if General Flynn says, I've got something, he's got something that maybe has nothing to do with Russia in 2016?
Absolutely. But the speculation now is that he has something on the campaign or something in the transition, because it's obvious that Mueller has determined that he's a very important figure in the investigation.
Right. So last question. Even if what is proffered in the early days from a legal standpoint is about Turkey and not about Russia, something could still lead back to Russia if, in fact, they start digging around with General Flynn, they go through other emails, they talk to other people.
Yeah, and let me be clear, we don't know at this point who he's cooperating against. It may relate to his Turkey problems.
Right.
But when that happens, when you go in and you're going to do a proffer, you're going to cooperate with the government, then you tell other defense lawyers, hey, I folded my cards, I'm out, I can't talk to you anymore.
Wait, so I misled you. One last question. That wasn't the last one. So when a lot of people are speculating in the media right now, this is going to lead to the Oval Office. He could implicate the president. He may implicate someone else inside the White House. He may try to implicate someone from the campaign, and it may end up having nothing to do with it.
Absolutely. In fact, we don't know yet that the prosecutor has accepted his proffer. We don't know even if the prosecutor has determined that he's a credible guy.
There is a lot we do not know, but we appreciate you bringing the facts of what we do know. John Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you. So far, President Trump has not tweeted about Michael Flynn, but the president did tweet that he'll, quote, get it all done on what he calls a mess in the Middle East. He also said he inherited that mess. He didn't give any details about his plans to clean it up. But Phil Keating, live in West Palm Beach, Florida, near where the president is spending Thanksgiving weekend. Phil, the president is making some international phone calls on foreign policy, especially after that terror attack in Egypt today.
Yeah, about 3 o'clock we are told, so just now underway, the latest phone call from Mar-a-Lago, the Winter White House, by the president across the ocean. This call going to the president of Egypt to talk about this morning's deadly and massive terrorist attack. And based on one of President Trump's earlier tweets today on the topic, we can expect he'll convey these same reactionary sentiments. Quote, horrible and cowardly terrorist attack on innocent and defenseless worshipers in Egypt. The world cannot tolerate terrorism. We must defeat them militarily and discredit the extremist ideology that forms the basis of their existence. Now, we are still hoping that the White House later this afternoon will give us some more details about how long that call lasts and perhaps better details about what exactly was said in between the two presidents. Now, this morning, the president also made an international phone call with the president of Turkey. Now, according to the Turks, the President Erdogan and President Trump talked about three main topics. Number one, the developments in Syria, bilateral relations, and a potential summit between the two nations in Russia in the city of Sochi, the most recent home of the Winter Olympics. Ed?
Phil, obviously, as you lay it out, Commander-in-Chief has a lot of responsibilities on the world stage, but the president also has a lot of big meetings next week that focus on his agenda right here at home.
Yeah, today we just learned that on Tuesday, right around noontime, the president will actually have lunch in person with a GOP policy team, a bunch of senators, and undoubtedly they will be discussing the Senate's big tax cut and tax reform bill. The version's already passed the House. The president made a huge campaign promise out of huge tax cuts for the American people. So he really hopes to get that Senate bill passed next week, if not shortly thereafter, and then sign that into law at least by December. And there's some actual vacation time for the president. Yes, we got a little golf time on the links today with some of the best players in the world. Tiger Woods, Dustin Johnson, currently the #1 ranked golfer in the world, and PGA Pro Brad Faxon, all of them meeting up with the president at his Trump National Golf Club, about 30 minutes drive north of here up in Jupiter. Pool media was not allowed to take any video pictures of this, so we really don't know exactly how the four fared. I think it's safe to say the three other than the president shot really well. We just don't know who had the lowest score in the end.
We'll keep digging on that. Phil Keating, appreciate the fact and the reporting. Senator Al Franken, meanwhile, offering an apology after new accusations of inappropriate behavior. Could the one-time rising star in the Democratic Party be facing the end of his career? What he says about his political future as he gets ready to face the media for the first time about all of this. Coming up from the Fox News Desk. Democratic Senator Al Franken apologizing after 4 women accused him of inappropriately touching them. Franken says he's sorry for making the women, quote, feel badly, but he did not admit to groping them, and he's promising to try to regain the trust of voters in his home state of Minnesota. Last week, radio host Leanne Tweeden said Franken touched and kissed her against her will during USO tour in 2006. On Monday, another woman said he grabbed her rear end during a photo op at the Minnesota State Fair in 2010. And the Huffington Post reports 2 other women say he did the same thing to them, campaign events in 2007 and 2008. Kristen Fisher's live in Washington. Kristen, Senator Franken has now put out 3 different statements. Any idea when we can expect to hear from him in person?
Well, Ed, we're hearing it could happen this weekend. Senator Franken's expected to speak to reporters about these allegations on Sunday, and it should be very interesting to see what he has to say because, you know, so far he's been walking this very fine line of apologizing without actually admitting to the things that these women are accusing him of. In his latest statement from last night, he said in part, quote, "I'm a warm person. I hug people. I've learned from recent stories that in some of those encounters I crossed a line for some women, and I know that any number is too many. I feel terribly that I've made some women feel badly, and for that, I am so sorry." So Senator Franken's now facing an ethics investigation, something he says he supports, but Ed, his approval ratings are dropping fast. According to a poll by Politico, 50% of voters now think that Senator Franken should resign. Ed?
Kristen, he's certainly not the only lawmaker facing these kinds of charges at a time when Congress has a very tight window here before the end of the year to try to enact some of the Trump agenda.
Yeah, and that window is closing really fast. You know, at the very least, these allegations are a big distraction right when Congress is up against this hard deadline. Congress is exactly 2 weeks from today to pass a bill to avoid a government shutdown. The deadline, remember, it was set in the deal that President Trump struck with Democrats back in September. So Chuck and Nancy, as the president likes to say, they may insist that a legislative solution for DACA, for those dreamers, they may insist that that fix be included in that spending bill as well. And that could really hold things up for President Trump and what he really wants to accomplish by the end of the year. And that, of course, is tax reform. As we heard our Phil Keating report from Florida on Tuesday, President Trump's going to be heading to Capitol Hill to speak at the weekly policy lunch for Republican senators. They're going to be voting next week on their version of a tax bill. And then you've got the Big Four meeting. Ryan, McConnell, Pelosi, and Schumer, they'll be heading over to the White House also on Tuesday for an Oval Office meeting. And the last time they had a meeting like that, the president stunned Republicans by striking a deal with Chuck and Nancy. So, Ed, who knows what'll happen this time, right?
A lot on the plate. Kristen Fisher, appreciate it. As you just heard from Kristen, a lot on the line when President Trump heads to the Hill next week. He says he wants to sign a tax bill by the end of the year. Can Republican leaders actually deliver? We'll take it to our political panel straight ahead. Senate Republicans say they hope to vote on their tax plan as soon as this coming week. But some of their own members say they still have big problems with the plan. President Trump has said he wants to sign a tax bill by the end of the year. It would be the Republican Party's first major legislative win since he took office, after the Senate failed to pass a health care bill. Let's bring in our political panel. Atima Omara is a Democratic strategist and the former president of Young Democrats of America. And Chris Perdome is a Republican strategist. Good to see you both.
Good to see you. Thanks.
Chris, I want to start with you as a Republican. This seems to be make or break time for the GOP. You've got the House, you've got the Senate, you've got the White House, and you've got no major win.
That's right, and well, it certainly is a make or break time, more so for Congress with a 17% approval rating. This has to be a week, first of all, a year of getting things actually done. Of course, they had repeals done earlier this year, but actual legislation getting done. Tax reform is something that was big on the campaign trail. But look, there's been a lot of talk in regards to not affecting, not being important for the middle class. This is a bill that is designed for the middle class on the Senate side. As Budget Director Mulvaney said, if it's a good situation solution, it will become something that is permanent. You have to look at, for example, 86% of collected penalties from the IRS are from households with under $100,000 a year. 58% are from households that make less than $50,000 a year. So it's time to essentially cut that out and have a tax break for the middle class that's beneficial for everybody.
All right, Atima, what about that? As Chris lays out some of the actual details of the plan, beyond the spin on both sides, I pointed out the Republicans, they're facing a lot of heat, and rightly so, because they haven't delivered so far. But this could easily be flipped around heading into an election year that so far, not a single Democrat is supporting tax cuts. How is that?
Well, I mean, it comes down to this. Like, we're interested in having a conversation about tax cuts and a tax plan if it takes really into account pretty much the middle class and lower income Americans, and not the corporation tax cuts that some even Republicans are concerned about that go from 35 to 20%, or factoring in sort of the 1%, right? And so, you know, a lot of these conversations have been led by McConnell and Ryan on the Hill that are very close door meetings. They're not really taking into account a lot of Democratic sort of considerations. So going into this Tuesday, you know, with President Trump's meeting on the Hill, he really has to kind of come out of that showing that he can be that deal maker that he always tries to talk about being, you know, and really sitting down and being like, all right, we got a budget showdown, we've got some deadlines looming, how are we going to get this done? Because even he knows that the people who put him in office are those folks who are very much interested in those tax cuts for the middle class and lower income Americans.
Chris, fair point there, because it seems to me there is, if not a civil war, a split in the Republican Party. You have people like Bob Corker and Jeff Flake at odds with the president. He's been going after them on Twitter and the like. And you have the possibility, as Kristen Fisher was reporting a moment ago, about the whole Chuck and Nancy deal, where a few weeks back the president reached across the aisle and just said, look, the Republicans aren't getting it done, so I'm going to have to cut a deal. So might we see on Tuesday the president putting the heat not on the Democrats, but putting the heat on the Republicans and saying, I'm going to reach across the aisle and cut a deal here?
Well, even if the deal is cut, we still have to have a majority vote, and that's a whole other challenge in itself. Number one, look at under President Obama's administration, he was very supportive on lowering the tax rate to 25%. So again, this whole talk of not being fair and only for the rich and wealthy, it's not true. We're lowering the tax bracket itself essentially at zero. This is something that is a big push. I know the president, of course, the White House is really big on having a beneficial tax reform for the middle class. That is the main push of this entire agenda.
So, Atima, what are the 2 or 3 things that are not in the GOP plans, because you got one in the House, one in the Senate, that Democrats want to see? I mean, give us 2 or 3 specifics, as was just laid out by Chris. The corporate tax cut, it's something President Obama wanted to cut as well. So,
well, yes, I mean, I think if there's a conversation about cutting the corporate tax rate and fine-tuning some standards there, as opposed to going from 35% to roughly 20%, that's pretty low, or factoring in, you know, when you look at the tax cuts, the most folks who are going to benefit are in the top 1%. I think revising the tax code so that those who are in the middle class and lower income have larger tax cuts, right? Because that's the base of the economy that we have here. And then also looking into programs that we've had pretty much, you know, right now they've added in the individual mandate that would actually raise premiums and finances for young Americans, because that's in there right now, so that's a non-negotiable for Democrats. And you know, no one's talked about this, but the S-chip funding has failed, or it's not is like expired essentially
for children's health insurance.
For children, yeah. So right now on Tuesday they're going to get this letter. If you're a kid getting treated on cancer and you're lower income, you know, you're kind of crap out of luck until the end of the year. So they have some big fixes.
Well, I'm going to let Chris get in here, but Atima, isn't it also you're kind of out of luck if you're a supporter of Obamacare and you live in, say, Arizona, and your premiums have gone up 116%? I would expect a mom and dad having problems feeding their kids.
That is something that Democrats have contended from the start. You know, we want to have a conversation about dealing with those who are pulling, those insurers who are pulling out of the marketplace. Certainly, higher premiums for anyone is certainly not a benefit, and it didn't help with the executive order that was signed by, you know, Trump in taking away some of those subsidies for those who needed those premiums to be reduced.
Let's give
but
Chris
then also,
a chance.
Oh, thank you. But then also, Tim, no one talks about things such as taking away write-offs. So right now, employees can take their employees to lunch and write off essentially half of the cost, and we're taking that away. That's going to bring numerous money back into the budget. There's things like that we need, which no one talks about things like that. So it's a both give and take relationship. And of course, currently right now, when you look at the whole situation, there's mostly individuals who can't even afford to pay. Over half can't even afford to pay the deductibles because they're so high, if we never even changed it.
Chris, what about the fact that the Republicans were already struggling to pass a tax cut? And then in the last couple of weeks, they threw in, let's repeal the individual mandate on health care. Now, if you can pass a tax cut and basically cripple Obamacare by taking out that individual mandate, in basketball, it's basically a double bank shot, okay? But you haven't proven you can you can score a layup at this point. You haven't done either healthcare or taxes. Putting the two of them together, was that really a smart idea?
You know, I think at this point, with being just a couple weeks left, well, in that case it was a while back, a few weeks ago, but at this point, it's about getting something done this year. And I can tell you from my conversation with senior White House officials, they're all about making something happen, to your point, a double bank shot this year. And I think they said, hey, if we can figure out health care and we can do taxes at the same time, we can repeal the individual mandate and make it beneficial for everyone, and of course, and lowering the tax bracket. I think that was a way that they said, hey, they spoke with Ryan, they spoke with O'Connor, and said, hey guys, what can we do that actually makes sense across the aisle that can get something done on both sides? And that's hence why you have the bill changing on the Senate side, which obviously is repealing that individual rate as well.
So, Atima, where are we going to be at the end of the year?
Where we're going to be at the end of the year? Well, we've got a special election looming on December 12th. We've got a budget showdown coming up a few days before that. We've got a tax plan. We've got health care. There's a lot on the table for both sides of the aisle to have discussions about, and they really, really need to be trying their best to work together within reason.
Right.
And it's going to be harder, I think, on the Republican side, because there is some unity right now on the Democratic side, you know, at least when it comes to legislative priorities. And, you know, with sort of the the hawk deficits with Corker and Flake and McCain and some of them, and then others who are in the Freedom Caucus. It's just going to be a bit of a balance. They have to pass the Senate bill and then be able to agree on a bill going into conference. Right now, the Senate doesn't even really agree with all components of the House bill. So they've got some challenges ahead.
Well, also Democrats cannot be combative as well. And look, the bottom line is this: when it comes to people's lives, we cannot have politics play. We have to stop being so political and get things done. And that's what this is about: is making things happen for overall all Americans, corporate America, middle class America, and that's what this bill is
if
about.
Ryan and McConnell would certainly not have these secret door discussions about the GOP tax plan and calling it only that and not working with
the
Democrats,
Democrats wouldn't be combative and want to shut it down. We wouldn't have to have behind doors closed.
There is no shutting it down. You can't shut it down when the doors are already closed.
Sounded like some unity until the last 5 or 10 seconds. Thanksgiving miracle. Atima, Chris, appreciate the time today.
All right, thank you.
All right, ahead. The worst terror attack one nation has ever seen. Bombers targeting a place of worship, while gunmen waited at the exits to murder those trying to escape. Also, new details on a scare in London, where false reports apparently started a stampede. That's coming up straight ahead. Islamic militants who attacked a mosque in Egypt set a deadly trap for people trying to escape. They waited outside the doors and opened fire as worshipers tried to run away. That's according to government officials and police officers. They say gunmen stayed at the scene, spraying first responders with bullets. The attack happened in Bir al-Abad, a coastal town about 125 miles northeast of Cairo, in the country's Sinai Peninsula. Officials say the militants killed at least 200 people, wounded more than 100 others. It's Egypt's deadliest terror attack in modern history. ISIS has attacked Coptic Christian churches in Egypt, but analysts say an attack on a mosque there is highly unusual. No group has yet claimed responsibility. President Trump tweeting that he'll call the Egyptian president soon. We expect that call could happen this hour. We'll update you if we get details. Meanwhile, Connor Powell is live from our Mideast newsroom. Connor, what is the latest on this brutal attack?
Yeah, Ed, no group has claimed responsibility, as you said, but the assumption is that it's an affiliate of the ISIS that has really wreaked havoc in the peninsula, Sinai Peninsula area in the last 3 to 4 years, launching attacks on Coptic Christians and on security checkpoints across the area. Now, just in the last few hours, the Egyptian military has launched a series of airstrikes in the Sinai, not saying what they were targeting, but the assumption is that they at least had some evidence or intelligence to point on who may have carried out this rather sophisticated attack. Now, the attack took place during middle of the day as people were going to the mosque to pray. It was a fairly sophisticated attack in the sense that there was first a bomb outside the mosque, and then as people were trying to flee, some 40 or so militants in vehicles began opening fire, shooting as the worshipers were trying to escape the chaos. They also targeted security and rescue personnel trying to get into the area. Analysts look at this and say that not only did the attackers have a sense that there was very little security in the area, but also that there was very little security that would get to that area in time to stop a deadly attack. Ed.
Connor, we mentioned that President Trump may, in fact, be speaking to the Egyptian president as we speak. It's scheduled to be happening right now, as you know. In the meantime, what is the Egyptian government saying about all of this?
Well, Egypt's strongman President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi was on television earlier tonight vowing revenge, vowing to get tough and to take things he's done many times before. But listen to what he had to say tonight.
The military forces and the civil police will take revenge for our martyrs and bring back security and stability with force in the near future. This is our response. We will respond to this attack with extreme power when confronting these terrorists and infidel thugs.
For the last 3 years, ISIS and other militant groups have really launched a very deadly campaign, not only in the Sinai, but across the country. Sisi's efforts to tackle terrorism and extremism have really done very little, Ed, to prevent those attacks.
Connor Powell live in our Mideast newsroom. Thank you for that report. Meanwhile, in London, terror fear is sparking absolute panic in the heart of the city's shopping district. Heavily armed police flooded a busy subway station after reports of gunfire. This happened at Oxford Circus as crowds frantically ran for cover. but cops now say they found no evidence of shots fired, and city officials have reopened the tube station. One woman was reportedly hurt in the stampede. This comes, of course, as London is on edge after a string of terror attacks in the last year. Closer to home, panic as well at a mall near Miami this Black Friday after somebody reported shots fired. Witnesses report people screaming and yelling at people to run away. But according to local media, it was, yes, yet another false alarm. Mall security reports that something fell and made a very loud noise. That led somebody to pull a fire alarm. That set off a near stampede. No reports, thankfully, of anybody getting hurt. Meanwhile, North Korea is upping security at the DMZ after that daring escape. While North Korea is upping security at the DMZ after that daring escape by a soldier into South Korea. The DMZ, that strip of land separating the North and South. Here's video of the soldier defecting from North Korea. According to South Korean media, North Korea responded by replacing its entire team of guards at that border. That after they fired some 40 shots, but the soldier somehow managed to survive. The North also reportedly dug trenches and temporarily closed a bridge that the soldier had used. The source says it could mean the North plans to install a security gate so no more of its soldiers can run away. Meanwhile, Facebook plans to help you figure out if you liked or followed pages created by a Russian company with ties to the Kremlin. That's according to a statement from Facebook. U.S. intel officials say the Russians used social media to try to influence the U.S. election last year. But our corporate cousin Wall Street Journal reports Facebook's notifications will not reach more than 100 million people who came across the page's ads and posts. A Facebook spokesman told the Journal it cannot identify everyone who may have seen the Russian propaganda. Let's bring in Jonathan Easley. He's a reporter who's covered the Russia probe for the Hill newspaper. Good to see you, Jonathan.
Hi, Ed.
So what is the point of Facebook doing this? Is this more sort of cover your backside than actually getting to the people who need to find out whether they like these posts?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head right there. I mean, this is kind of just a very small first step they can take to address this very big problem. I mean, lawmakers on Capitol Hill are eager to get to the bottom of how extensive Russian firms were using these tech giants and their social media platforms to peddle misinformation and what impact that might have had on the election. Like you said, this isn't going to touch all of the more than tens of millions of people that might have come in contact with some of this information. And also it's a reactive strategy. It's not going to keep people from coming into contact with that information going forward. Basically, it's there to educate people, to let them know, hey, you might have come into contact with this. Now, if you're a Democrat and you go and you see that you came into contact with that, well, I mean, you're probably already certain that that the Russians meddled and helped Trump defeat Hillary Clinton. If you're a Republican, you're likely to say, well, look, this information it was just one piece of information out of a lot of news that I consumed over the course of the election, and it didn't impact my vote or anything like that. So a very small first step, but I think we're going to see more moves like this by the tech giants to address this issue of how the Russians might have used their platforms.
So what's the takeaway for our viewers? If you're a Facebook user, what is the tool they've created so you can figure out whether or not this Russian propaganda touched you?
Yeah, well, it's not available yet, but what's going to happen is you'll get a notification and you'll go to a web page, and Facebook will say, we tracked your activity. You came into contact with this story or this information or this advertisement, and we've since found out that this was put out there by a Russian firm that was interested in sowing chaos in the political system. So essentially, it's just a signal, a way to sort of educate users to be careful about what kind of information they come across on their own platforms, which have become essentially massive news organizations. I mean, Facebook and Google have a lot of say on what stories people see, and have become major news platforms themselves. So it's a big issue.
Jonathan, I've got 30 seconds, but it seems to me the bigger issue as well is, you cover the Hill as well as anyone, that the real issue is big picture, that the tech companies have had relatively little regulation, and it seems like Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, want that to end.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that was just sort of oozing off of Capitol Hill when the lawyers for these tech giants went up there to testify before Congress. I mean, there's a big push right now to hold these tech giants accountable and to make sure that they know who's publishing what on their platforms. Jonathan Easley from the Hill, thanks for coming in. Thanks. Coming up, new details on the Uber cyber attack that affected more than 50 million people.
Uber CEO reportedly keeping quiet about the hack for months after he found out all about it. That's next. There's word that Uber's CEO knew about a hack that affected some 57 million people months before the company finally told customers about it this very week. That's according to our corporate cousin, the Wall Street Journal. Rick Leventhal is here. Rick, this story keeps getting stranger and stranger.
It does, and if you use Uber, there's a really good chance that at least some of your personal information was hacked, including your email address and your phone number, and some 600,000 Uber drivers also had their driver's licenses hacked, the numbers hacked. And this all happened in October 2016. So the company is now bending backwards to try and explain the timeline. In a statement, Uber's chief executive said, "You may be asking why we are just talking about this now a year later. I had the same question, so I immediately asked for a thorough investigation of what happened and how we handled it." But CEO Dara Khosrowshahi found out about the breach soon after he took the job this past September and didn't tell customers or drivers for 2 months. Uber now reveals that 2 former executives tried to fix the problem by paying the hackers $100,000 in exchange for their word that they would destroy the stolen data, but they didn't tell authorities about it. Those executives have now been fired, and Uber says that it now is notifying the drivers whose license numbers were downloaded, giving drivers free credit monitoring and identity theft protection, and notifying regulatory authorities. Uber says that none of this should have happened, and they have learned from their mistakes.
Oh, I bet they have. You have to love a corporate statement that says, I had the same question, in fact.
Yeah.
Now, we're also learning that the disclosure belatedly about the hack may have something to do with the fact that there were some shares in the company about to be sold.
Yeah, there's billions of dollars at stake here, and this whole issue could, in fact, affect the stock price. But that's not the only issue. The company has to worry now about possible legal ramifications. At least 6 states have opened investigations into this Uber hack, including Connecticut, Illinois, Massachusetts, Missouri, New Hampshire, and New York, and this could be just the beginning. Some 48 states actually have laws that require companies to tell consumers in the event of some kind of hack like this. And Ed, we still have to take the hacker's word for it that they actually destroyed that information that they claim they destroyed when they got paid the $100,000.
100,000, basically, it sounded like under the table, wink, wink, take this money, and nobody will know the difference.
Right. So those executives that did that got fired, and now the company has launched its own internal investigation.
Unreal. Rick Leventhal, good to see you.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, families holding out hope, but now getting some heartbreaking news. We're live at the Pentagon with an update on the U.S. Navy plane that crashed at sea. That's next.